Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today entitled Innovation in the Legal Industry. My name is Austin Hoppert, and I'm here with Joseph Raczynski. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for this one. So now I'd like to introduce you to the presenter, Joseph Raczynski. He is an innovator and early adopter of all things computer related. His primary focus is around the future of tech, and he speaks around the world about legal technology, cybersecurity, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and drone technology. He also writes about the future of technology as it impacts the crossroads of our personal and professional lives, particularly in the legal sector. He co-hosts a podcast with a tech focus under the umbrella of Thomson Reuters and serves as a mentor with the Columbia IBM Blockchain Accelerator. He is a cybersecurity committee member at the University of South Florida and is a presidential committee appointee to the American Bar Association Center for Innovation Governing Council. Currently, Joseph is with Thomson Reuters Legal, managing a team of technologists for the large law, corporate, and government divisions in the U.S. Joseph serves the top law firms in the world, consulting on legal trends and customizing Thomson Reuters legal technology solutions for enhanced workflows. If you like, you can connect with Joseph at joetechnologist.com or josephraczynski.com or on Twitter at joeraz. And with that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Austin, thank you so much. As always, really appreciate you taking the time to go through that. So today, of course, we're going to be talking about innovation and its impact on the legal industry. This is a fascinating topic from my vantage point because so much has changed, even in the last 5 years. And I've been in the industry, I guess, for 15 now. So there's been a lot that's changed. So what I want to do is sort of cast the light on why we're seeing the change, what we're about to see, and all this stuff starts to come together. So it's really kind of a neat thing. So let's start talking about the agenda. I think that's probably the best way to begin this. The topic, of course, first is we're going to highlight some innovation headlines. What are we seeing across the landscape, not only in the United States, but beyond? I mean, what's going on across the world? Because there are some parts of the world that might be leading in this direction that we see in the legal industry. So I'll bring some of that into this conversation. We'll also define it. Yes, we need to define what innovation is, and it may be somewhat obvious, but there are some nuances to it that I want to get into. Why innovate now? So why is it becoming so important for law firms, for corporations, for government agencies, and all practitioners to really start to embrace this concept? We'll talk about it. Then we'll break down a few components, some pieces that people are starting to do that make sense, practical ways of thinking about innovation and what you can do in that space. We'll talk about design thinking. So this is sort of a cool little space to be involved in. If you haven't done it, I'll take you through what I went through with a number of different design thinking workshops. And then we'll talk about innovation examples. What specifically have we seen across the legal tech landscape that's starting to move its way into the sphere? And then lastly, I love talking about the future, right? So I got to talk about the future. So if we have time, we'll get into the future of innovation. And this is the part that I would say you could lean in on and say, okay, if things are really going to change the way that I practice because AI is filtering in and maybe I don't have to do as much research on this side because a lot of the research is sort of being done in a different fashion, then what else can I do? How can I broaden that perspective? What other avenues are out there for me? So here we go. Let's talk about innovation in the news. Here are some headlines that I grabbed recently, but I think are relevant and will speak to some of the things that we're about to get into in the bigger picture. Is outside ownership of law firms picking up steam? Question mark. Yeah, and if you start looking at state by state, you'll see that there are at least 3 states right now that have moved into this space, that have broadened the definition around who really should own a law firm. That's a big deal, and that's only going to probably continue to move in that direction, but we'll see. Then you start to see firms like Blank Rome, who welcomed a new Chief Innovation and Value Officer. So the titles are changing. Why are they changing? Well, there's some real reasons in that, and we'll unpack that one as well. And then this one, reimagining the global law firm through legal design. So that design thinking that we talked about before. How can you redesign how processes are completed inside of a law firm? And we'll use that as an example going forward. Think about those other organizations that are out there. So the consulting firms, so the Ernst& and Youngs, the PwCs, what are they doing? Well, they're buying lots of legal tech organizations, and they're starting to, maybe chomp at some of the traditional legal practices that we've seen from law firms. Then we're starting to see genuine collaboration. This is really cool, and we're going to talk about all this stuff. Last one is, are UK law firms less innovative than US law firms? I don't know. I'll talk about that as well. So there's a lot of things happening. This was a big one. This happened maybe 2 years ago. There was $65 million injection into an organization called Atrium, which is the idea of rebuilding how a law firm would operate, how it would work in a certain practice. This is really trying to bring on startups. And when you bring a startup on, what do you need to do? Well, you need to educate them, of course, usually a smaller, maybe younger audience. What do they need to be aware of? All of those pieces, and then build out a workflow that brings in collection of information, who they are, what they're trying to do, and then why not pre-populate a lot of those forms that you would normally need to do to become incorporated, maybe in Delaware, or whatever the case is. Not long after this happened, then you saw it fail, right? So that's what's great about this. And I don't mean that in particular, but I mean in the bigger scheme of things, you're seeing an injection of money. You're seeing talent come into this space, but you're also seeing a paring down of what makes the most sense, what's plausible, what works and what doesn't work when we talk about innovation. So let's now jump into innovation in and of itself. Old school library, I love them, right? Good old school West books, publishing, all that fun stuff. Still makes you feel good when you go in there. Love the smell. All right, so here we go. We're talking about innovation. Now, this is a little bit silly, and I do that on purpose. What is innovation? And that's the crux of what we're about to get into. Just because something is innovative doesn't mean it's a good idea. And that should be a theme throughout all of this. Innovation for the sake of innovation, because it's a buzzy word, doesn't mean it's something that we should all just do by putting all of our old school remotes attached to our heads so we don't lose them. This was a picture of me as a kid coming down a slide. And yes, innovation, giving natural selection a little nudge. Yeah, I actually don't want to leave this up any further. I don't like the look of that. But here's another one. I don't know these guys, but this, while it may be innovative, is clearly perilous if you're looking at it. So they're basically in a blow up pool. They have a bunch of their radios, whatever the case is, on the table, and they're extending the electricity by putting the electrical components on top of two floatable pieces of footwear. Yeah, not necessarily the best. Clearly something that's going to happen there. So they're not all good ideas. And then get around to some more beneficial ideas. And I like the way that this quote came out. So innovation in this view is seeing what everybody has seen and thinking about what nobody else has thought. Kind of cool, right? One of those things you might put on your wall, maybe your digital wall at this stage. So let's now get to real, plausible, tangible defining of innovation. I like what the professor Teresa did here. She's talking about innovation is the successful implementation of creative ideas within an organization. No question, she's dead on there. Another one from the UK Department of Innovation and Skills, innovation is the successful exploitation of new ideas. Another way of looking at it, absolutely. Innovation is the creation of something that improves the way we live our lives, by Barack Obama. Absolutely, totally, the president was right about that. Innovation is change that creates a new dimension of performance. Yeah, absolutely. Fundamentally, what I think it comes down to is this, right? Innovation is the creation, development, innovation, implementation of a new product, a process, a service, with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, and competitive advantage. That's really what we're going to be talking about. That's what we're going to see going forward. So let's say that that's our buttoned up definition on all of this right now. Now, there are various types of innovation that I think we all should be generally aware of here. The first is incremental. So we'll talk about what incremental innovation is. The second is disruptive. I think this is what we mostly think of as innovation. But it's not all that. It's not everything being completely and totally disrupted in order to get something accomplished, to think about something differently. Then there's architectural innovation. So that's yet another concept that we'll wrap our arms around. And then radical innovation is yet another. So what does this look like? Now, on the x-axis, we're talking about technology. So newer technologies that help enable us to do things, to think about things a little more differently. And on the other side is market, the way that you may practice, your practice of law. So the first one that we'll look at here is the incremental innovation. So that's that existing part that we're used to. We may get into a little bit more. Then we go off to the right. So disruptive innovation. That's a little more cutting edge in some respects. And then when we're talking about architectural innovation, that's thinking about things a little bit differently. And we're going to go into each one of these, but that's how the paradigm looks when we think about this. So first, incremental innovation. This is a no-brainer. And as soon as I go through the first sentence, you'll be like, yep, I got it. And it's intentional because I want to break these four down. So this is talking about utilizing existing technology and increasing value to customers by making little tweaks. And this is innovation. This is innovation that we all need to constantly be aware of and take advantage of and not dismiss, such that, let's say you are a solo shop. You've hung your shingle, right? And you basically have your website and has all of 5 pages to it, and you want to change your contact page. Right now you have, hey, reach out to me if you want to get more involved in torts or whatever it is, or insurance, whatever the case is. And you tell people, hey, reach out to me at my email address. But then over time you realize you're getting a lot of spam. You're getting a lot of weird requests from people, and you're like, shoot, it's because I have my email address up there. So what's a new way of doing that? Well, the better way of doing that now typically is to create a form. The form hides all of that personal or PII information such that when somebody wants to reach out to you, of course, they fill out their name and their firm and whatever the case is, and they click send. That's an incremental innovation. That's something small, tangible. It makes sense. Absolutely worth considering anytime you're involved in doing this. So that's how that would work. Disruptive innovation. Now, this is something that I would normally think of as altogether changing the way that we do and the way that law firms interact or corporations or whatever the case is. But what it is it's also seen as stealth innovation. So it involves applying new technology or processes to your company's current market. So it is taking something that is brand new, and in the beginning, it stinks. Honestly, it stinks because you get something that's like, I got a new technology, let me try to apply it in this fashion. And it's bulky, it may not work well, but in concept, if you see that you can refine that, it becomes a game changer. And if you think about the cell phone, that was a bit of a game changer, clearly, when we were able to contact each other, but we had it for a number of years. And then little changes on that, not that big a deal. The big deal came when we had the iPhone. So when the iPhone came out 12 years ago or so, whatever the case is now, that was a massive change. The initial iterations of that were ugly, didn't work that well, were kind of nutty, and we've heard a lot of the stories that Steve Jobs had around this, which I will not go into. But yes, that's sort of disruptive change and disruptive innovation in that space. The next one is the architectural innovation. I really like this one because this is where I've spent a lot of my time as a legal technologist, is going outside of the legal industry and seeing what's going on within fintech, so the financial tech industry, biotech, startups across the board. What's happening within those industries that I could then sort of like kind of grab their ideas and pull it over to the legal industry, because there's so many cool things happening that we wouldn't have even thought would play a role within the legal industry to improve the way that we help our clients, the way we do things, to make it better for all of the various groups that we're interacting with. The best example here is what I love to say is the Lean Six Sigma. Of all things, I was shocked. I was honestly shocked to see this filter into the system. So again, the concept of architectural innovation is going outside of the industry, looking at what other groups are doing, and then bringing that into the industry. And in this instance, we're talking about Lean Six Sigma, which goes way back in my mindset to, I guess it was World War I or II, and manufacturing. And what had happened was, sadly, in Japan, a lot of cities were decimated. And what they wanted to do was bring in new manufacturing society, so to speak, especially with cars and other areas. And Six Sigma basically tries to root out all of the errors as much as possible. Um, if you look at a chart and you're trying to figure out from beginning to end how much you can root out these things, you're trying to reduce defects or errors in that system. The further out you go in terms of how many applications you develop, or let's say how many cars or how many widgets you develop, the idea is to reduce the amount of errors as possible to down to 0.00001% of all that you produce is in that same light. So now you're starting to see this applied to pricing predictability when it comes to thinking about if I had a similar case that took X number of attorneys over Y period of time based on a particular matter, you're able to predict that widget, and I hate to put it that way, but that widget of time, billable time, and you're able to project in the future, well, if I have that same matter, how many people do I need? How much time do I need? How much time of the partners do I need to sort of pull this all together? That's leveraging Lean Six Sigma. And that's pulling things from outside the legal industry and putting it in, porting it in, modifying it, and getting it to work. Kind of cool. So that's the architectural innovation there. And then lastly, this is the one that I think most of us, at least I've always traditionally thought of as true innovation, and that's the radical innovation. That's where we think of something that's completely mind-blowing, that's totally new, and trying to bring that into the industry. So the way that I think about this, and if you've ever caught me talking before about AI or blockchain, those are the technologies that I personally feel will have this radical innovation potential within the legal industry. So how is AI going to transform the legal industry? Short term, probably not as much as some people talk about, what we read about, but long term, it might be more disruptive than we want to think about. Same thing with blockchain. I have Ethereum up here, which is really the biggest blockchain that makes sense in the legal industry right now. It's programmable. It allows you to do smart contracts. So these are the types of radical innovation that we'll start to see seep into the industry, which will make a difference, which will change the way that people practice. And so that's the part that we're going to be really excited about. And hopefully, if we have time, we'll talk about at the very end of this. So why? Why are we innovating now? Well, there's a lot of things happening. The first is clearly the ABA model rules for professional responsibility. And if we look at Rule 1.1 and competency, we're thinking about lawyers, attorneys. I always say lawyers for the people that are in the UK. I know it doesn't factor in for you all, but when I talk to those audiences, so I'm so used to saying that. The attorneys shall provide competent representation to a client. What does that involve? You all know this extraordinarily well, but we're talking about the legal knowledge, the skill sets, the thoroughness. Technology is a big component of that as we start to think about it. So you must maintain that technological competence as these new technologies come out. Do your best. I know it's not easy given your time schedules, but to think about what's coming, to keep an eye on all that stuff, that's a core component to this as we start to talk about why we're talking about innovation. So when I started thinking about this a little while ago, I pulled together these concepts and hopefully they resonate for you all. And I don't want to offend anybody here. I really don't intend to do that. But what I want to talk about is legal's history. We've had from the Constitution until now, a lot of changes, but yet not, right? So you have rules that have been created from the bills and, bills sitting on Capitol Hill, whatever, right? So you have the basis for these things. But once those things have been put into place, not much has changed in the industry. We've seen a lot of change over 2020 because people had to fast forward very quickly, had to change the way they thought about the law, the way they interacted with each other, the way they interacted with their clients. Wet signatures, are they as important now? Probably not, but some people are still saying yes. But we're moving in the direction where that stuff isn't as necessary. You can do a digital signature. Contracts are thought about differently. You can pull workflows together differently. The idea is that we've sort of been in the status quo for the legal industry for ages. I mean, decades upon decades upon decades. And as I've sat in other parts of various industries outside of the legal industry for different periods of time, I've always looked back at the legal industry and been like, oh, we're a little bit behind the times. Yes, we're definitely behind the times. We are catching up as an industry. We are definitely catching up, but it's been a slow go of it. So let's really talk about the other parts that have moved us in the direction that has really fostered this idea of innovation and why we really need to be spending time on it. And while it may be a little bit small there, these are the things that I think about. 2009, the financial crisis was a major impetus for us to move forward in this. Client pressures because of that. Clients were expecting far more with less for you timing to be able to do some of these things. Startups, so legal tech. So you had all this technology out there in the world, and they hadn't touched legal because legal was like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to buy it. We're not going to use it. Why? Then all of a sudden, the pressures came, and legal tech was like, geez, there's this huge, and again, don't mean any disrespect, but there's a sizable amount of money in the legal industry, like a ton, relative to other industries, because the efficiencies weren't necessarily there. And so what they decided to do was like, let's go after this golden pot of money because maybe we can come up with a solution that will make things easier for your clients, for us, for people to get access to justice, or whatever the case is. They saw that and they're like, let's go after it. We'll talk about the total influx of legal tech organizations in the industry. So that's that startups nipping at the heels of different sections of that. Process improvements was a natural progression. How do we improve the process of maybe client intake all the way through to the end, right? So what can we do in that? Fixed fees, oof, yeah, those came along. We've talked about it, yes, in certain industries, depending even on a region. When I travel or when I used to travel, certain regions of the country, albeit even around the world, are using these more than others. I continue to think that those things will continue to move forward, but there is still some pullback on that. Then there's peers. So looking at other firms, what are they doing? Are they innovating? And then of course you had 2020, which was a massive push into this space. And then of course, Rule 5.4, non-lawyer ownership is another one that all of us need to keep an eye on. At least 2 or 3 states are moving forward with this, and that is a big one. We've seen that in the UK for ages, where corporations can have ownership of these types of things. So what else? What else were the big factors? Why are we thinking about this? Why are we being pushed into this? Big data. A lot of law firms like, I don't deal with big data, but there's a lot of big data out there, whether it be on the e-discovery side or of digestion of as much information as you can possibly digest to see what's relevant for those particular cases. But there's more data out there than people even think about. Think about all the dockets that have ever existed in every jurisdiction. Now, if you're able to tap into those dockets and look at the basis or the information that's in that, there's so much you can glean from that. There's so much you can learn from that. There's the ability to guess based on data what a judge may decide on. And so these are the types of things that people are going to start to use, leveraging AI as a component of that. So pointing the AI towards the big data. What can you garner? What can you learn from that? Then you're starting to see developers show up at the doors of law firms. I mean, going back whatever number of years that I've been speaking with law firms, the beginning they're like, no way, why would we ever hire a developer? We're going to just have them sit there and what are they going to do? Now you can leverage the big data, the AI, pull the algorithms off the shelf, tap the algorithm, and then point it towards these huge amounts of data internally or externally, and then learn something from that and help your attorneys be better suited to help their clients. It's really cool stuff. APIs, all that means is a computer to computer call. It's a way for information to exchange from one computer to another with ease on great scale. So you can leverage this information very, very easily. Ultimately, where are we going? That's no code. I know it's kind of funky and there's a lot going on this page right now, so I apologize because there's a lot of flashing and blinking and all sorts of stuff. No code is the next iteration of where we're going. That means you will never have to program. Hopefully no attorney around you will ever have to program. It's drag and drop. It's learning things from pulling widgets of information and into dropping it into something and then having a dashboard view so that you can make intelligent decisions based on that data to help your clients, or to have it do something for you automatically, where you normally would have had to build out a document in Word or drafting assistant, whatever it might be. You're able to now do that in a much easier fashion. So why is the legal industry innovating again? Well, you can see this now. Thomson Reuters did a survey asking 106 different corporate general counsels why they moved work from outside counsel to a firm. And this goes back and forth. So value and efficiency is one reason. Quality of work was another. And you saw that maybe on the corporate side. Over budget. Maybe sometimes they saw that law firms were expensive. And so like, yeah, maybe we should go over to the corporates. You know what? So the people are rethinking the way they're doing things. Maybe it's from one firm to another because they're cheaper, because they're leveraging tools that Firm A is not. So Firm A doesn't have those tools. They don't have those work efficiencies. They haven't innovated on that side. So they're going over to the other firm who's been able to do a fixed fee agreement, and they're able to process this, tell you know what, this is going to cost $1,000. We know it's going to take 2 hours, 3 hours of work, and it'll be done at this amount of time because the model's built out. It's able to flush out all of this stuff. Really interesting stuff. So that's yet another reason there. This is also kind of a cool one. So at Atman Weil, you see a survey again, interviewing lawyers and law firms, saying, what do you think is the most important trend that will temporarily have an impact? Is it temporary or is it permanent? You see the blue? That's permanent. Obviously, at the highest end of it, they're saying that the price competition is the most important reason why they have to innovate. The second is focus on improved practice efficiencies. So that's yet another area. Going forward, you're looking at more commoditized legal work. So areas that you can basically take and create workflows around are becoming commoditized. So anybody can do that potentially. I'm not saying anybody can do it, but you can create processes that make it easier for the firm to handle those sorts of inflows of information. So going forward, the next question is, do you think the pace of change in the profession will change? Yeah, I think you see it. Dark blue means that it will increase. So we're still seeing the increase in this space. All right, so this is a funny one, and I respect Baker Hostetler to the moon. This isn't a reflection on anybody here. This is just a buzzy kind of article that came out and is an interesting one. So several years ago, and you can see this goes back to 2016, this is where you really started to see the rubber meet the road when people were saying innovation, innovation, innovation. And if you're not innovating, you know, blah, blah, blah. What you saw is this fanciful titling of the robot lawyer is going to take over the industry. And it was a particular product that I don't believe exists at this point in time. And it was the idea that you could point this algorithm towards a data set, a subset of other data, and have it service up sort of Q&A to you so that it made sense. I think it was in bankruptcy technically. And the idea behind this was that, wow, we now have technology that can sort of surface up answers for people very easily, very quickly. And the robot lawyer was at our doorstep. And of course, you see this sort of AI thing that comes from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, right? The Terminator. And that was overblown. It was overblown. And everyone in the industry, for the most part, most everyone in the industry would say that that was the case. We're not at a point where AI is going to completely disrupt and take over everything that's going on. Where we are at is at a point in time where there are technologies that are helping law firms, helping government agencies, corporations to rethink what's going on and what's happening. And people are innovating on that side. So these incremental pieces and just beyond the incremental pieces, to think about what we're doing as a group and what we can do better. And one of the things that I was talking about before is just this. We are at a point where this is one of my favorite slides, and I've been using this for 6 years or 5, 6 years. And the point of me using this is because this was the legal landscape for innovation 5 or 6 years ago. there were all these legal tech startups going back to the pot of gold that they're like, wow, we can really make a difference. There's a lot of money in this business. Maybe we can have some of that, but we can also, come up with our idea, help the firms, help the government agencies, whatever the case is. So you saw this springing effect of different companies into the landscape. Then there were 300 to 400 companies. Now there's 3,000 to 4,000. Massive leap forward. So you're seeing this shift where this is clearly having an impact on innovation for law firms and everybody else in the landscape. Added on to that, you see large organizations that have been in the legal industry for ages, right? And new ones that have sprung up. I mean, you might have Thomson Reuters been around for forever, right? Going back to West Publishing, 120 some odd years ago, maybe 140. I should know that. But then you have organizations like Ernst & Young, who are buying companies, legal tech startups. It might be River Law, it might be Pangea 3. Pangea 3 was a legal processing outsourcing company. This is the way my frame of reference, they do many more things than this, but they had 1,000 attorneys in India who initially handled discovery. So they were looking for relevant documents or relevant words, whatever the case is that you're looking for within those documents for discovery. And they were doing a lot of that, right? And they were doing it at a fraction of the price that you would charge someone in the United States attorney to do, or a lawyer in the United States to do that work. That's a shift. That's innovative work, right? So it's helping the client, it's helping the firm, a lot of different scale going on there. So kind of neat stuff. Sometimes it might be a little bit threatening, and I understand that. Another really cool one, and I had the opportunity of seeing the firm in action. Excuse me there. Had the firm talk about this stuff. So Fisher Boyles, who I believe is I believe is now in the AmLaw 200. And they're going off of this entirely decentralized model. So basically, all of the attorneys are partners. They don't, from my understanding, they don't have a physical location. They are leveraging as much technology as they possibly can, end to end, across the board. A lot of collaborative technologies, I think, that we're all using now. They take home 80% of what they bag, and meaning whatever client they are able to get, they take 80% of that. This model is maybe the direction that we'll start to see things, maybe not, maybe it's an anomaly. But these are the types of things that are innovative that people are starting to think about, are starting to use, starting to look at. Okay, so the next one is the world of bots. And I like this slide. This hat tip to my colleague Peter Collin, who put this one together. I've been talking about bots for ages, but I like the way he pulled some of these different ones together. Bots, and I've done this before, are interesting. They are basically at the most rudimentary level. Any one of us, any one of you who are on this right now can create your own bot using Amazon Alexa or other open source algorithms or versions, skills out there. In the beginning of creating a bot, you're essentially doing a Q&A. And you can write whatever question you want. Typically, you write a ton of questions, and then you write the answers to them. So that anytime someone throws out that question, well, the answer is already out there. So you are physically training that bot to do something, to answer the questions for that. That's what we're seeing when at the initial level of bots. They've gotten more sophisticated, and I'll talk about some of those on the following pages. This one, which I had not played around with too much, luckily I'm not in that space, but Hello Divorce. So with Hello Divorce, you basically go into the system and you're going through this question and answering, to the point where you are going down the road of, all right, geez, am I going to go through a divorce? Well, yes, here's the paperwork that you need for your jurisdiction. Here's how you file it. It collects information along the way. It knows who you are. It knows the various idiosyncrasies that you need to add to that, and ultimately gets to the point of giving you advice in that space. There's lots of bots out there. There's a lot of law firms that have gone down the road of this. There are organizations that will build these bots for you. There are organizations that you can buy off the shelf that will help you interact with potential clients. Those are no-brainers, especially for maybe smaller or mid-sized firms to take advantage of. So those are some of the apps that we're seeing right now that are being deployed by law firms of all sizes. This one I think is really cool. I wanted to put the video up, but I was somewhat trepidatious because sometimes when I put video on these things, it blows up the entire presentation. So what we have here is the ability to build out workflows. So think about a workflow that you might have in the transactional world. Let's do a landlord-tenant lease. So you as an attorney, they said, all right, there's a massive REIT, real estate investment trust that wants you to build out a workflow for all of their lease renewals. And they have 100 buildings. They have 1,000 lease renewals in those 100 buildings. So you need to build out a workflow that has, okay, 90 days before renewal, send me an email, send me the latest lease agreement, and then all the various finite materials and data that needs to be injected into that to make it so it's a viable contract going forward. Now, if you want to build this out, these days, typically you go to an application and you sort of piece it together. You have the contract, maybe look at the various parameters that change in the contract, and you're able to build that out. We're getting to the point where innovation is allowing us to speak to our computer, and it builds out the workflows. Literally, as I say, pull in jurisdictions for Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., and it knows, based on those particular jurisdictions, what is relevant. Maybe it's lead-based paint disclosures, things of that nature. So it starts to build these things out, and you're like, holy smokes, that's cool stuff. That's the direction that we're going to start to see some of these innovative practices go in. So where is all of this ending up as a sort of summary? A lot of firms are moving towards being data-driven. So data is the new oil. Hate saying that because it's just one of those things that it becomes trite at some point in time, but it's meaningful because where knowledge is still king, data is becoming even more important and is kind of rivaling that. So that expertise that you have in a firm, data is becoming, when you can aggregate it, apply an algorithm, is becoming a little more omniscient, which is kind of frightening, but is becoming more compelling for law firms and clients. So using analytics, that's what we're talking about. Garnering information from the data to create analytics to give you a path forward in helping you to make a decision about something. So that's what we're talking about. Now, my little points that when I would sit down with a law firm and talk about some of this stuff, and maybe they were somewhat tentative, and I totally get it, and I'm not trying to convince anybody about anything here. I'm just throwing out some ideas that I've either seen in action or worked with tangibly. This is what law firms are starting to do. This is what they're starting to think about. It's stuff that I tried to promote early on, and now people are, and that's not because of me, but they're starting to move in the direction of. So law firms are hiring innovation officers, people that are, one, thinking about the incremental. What can we do about that? Then they're thinking about that next step. What can we do that's maybe outside of the organization we can bring in? Or what can we do internally that's going to make a difference for people? The law firm's hiring data scientists. We have all this data. What can we do to apply the algorithms so we can learn something? What sort of white space or things that we can't even see as humans might be in there that we can sort of help us do what we do even better? Hiring developers. I met with a bunch of large law firms that have 10, 20, 25 different developers that are tasked with, one, maybe listening to the client. What can we do internally? What can we build using off-the-shelf tools, or maybe code something out, leverage other tools to couple together to make it so that we have all new workflows that now we have a competitive advantage versus all the other firms out there that might share the same space, same niche, same practices. So I see firms working with startups, which is kind of a cool thing. There's a lot of startups out there. There's the legal tech startups. Bend their ear. You both can learn from each other about what's happening in that space. Talking to universities. I've been talking with universities for ages, and they are a hotbed of amazing minds, men and women who are thinking about things differently, that are coming up with the latest concepts, which are prototyped there first and then eventually baked out into other places. General counsels, thinking about things differently. Vendors, the labs. I'll talk about labs in a little while. And then design thinking, we'll talk about that, data-driven. Then there's other organizations that you can work with. So there's like the ILTAs of the world, so International Legal Technology Associations. There's Legal Geek, which I'm a big fan of. And then there's things like Wonderlic. And these are companies that basically will vet your prospective attorney coming on with a host of questions to see how they think, how they react, how they act. It's a bit of AI, but it's an innovative way of looking at how we may employ somebody or bring them on. I don't know if I like that, but it's the case for some. So process mapping. Let's now get into some of the details about how you can think about innovating at your organization right now. So process mapping, best way to talk about this is if you're looking into workflow automation with a pen and paper, which you can still do, you don't necessarily always need to use technology, right? So the first step with any of this stuff is to think about the tasks at hand. Take a step back from what you do every day and think about what you do, what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes you might even describe that. The way I like to think about it is sit across from someone who may be in the legal industry, but maybe isn't, and describe what you do and how you go about it. And hopefully it's someone who's inquisitive and they can say, well, why are you doing that? I mean, think about maybe you can connect this to this. And from that, you start to get to the point of mapping these things out, which is that beyond incremental, but makes a difference. That's innovative. So the legal people in the world, and I don't blame them, will sit across from me and will say, hey, a lot of this stuff is legal centric, and it is. But what's different now is technology. So technology is bleeding into the way that people practice, and the way people think about things, and the way the services are provided. The laws, the regulations, the rules, the way we go about it, the procedure, all of that will remain. But now you're able to inject all of those pieces, leveraging technology, and do something completely differently. And that's the core component about thinking about what process mapping is. So this comes from Percipient, right? And this is this idea of creating workflows. And ultimately, that's what we're really talking about, are creating these workflows or charts to help process what you do as a practitioner, how you interact maybe with your let's say the intake, maybe it's the marketing people, maybe it's the various services that you use from the transactional side. What access do you need to various tools, the output that you eventually have, the document management systems, your financial systems, your time and billing, all of those pieces. And there's so many points that touch one of you as you practice. It's unbelievable. So it's rethinking that, reimagining that. So this is the bigger picture of what it should look like. And I did this the opposite. So we're talking about starting or finishing. So thinking about where you start and where you finish, the activity that's involved in that, the decision, and then the flow behind each and every one of those components. So as we start to think about that, and what are the benefits? And I think they're fairly obvious, but mapping a process can certainly expose those bottlenecks. You then can find those inefficiencies, the complexity, the opportunities for standardization is king. It's not just technology. Opportunities for process improvement is a big component to all of that. So we're starting to see insights into opportunities where data and metrics may be collected. It all comes together. It's really kind of neat. So this is how it works. One little thing call out here, if there's one word that or acronym that I'd like to call out, it's the Unified Modeling Language. If you haven't seen this, all it means is that it's UML. What you see on your screen, the green, are the way that a lot of industries use now. So what happened in the technical industry around ISO certifications, so standardizations, International Organization for Standardizations to be proper, they basically were able to use the same nomenclature, the same icons to make it so that we can see it in another industry. You can port that over to the legal industry as well, which allows you to be able to do some cool things. I'm not expecting you all to go through this, but the idea is building that flow and testing it, seeing how it works. So ultimately you get to the point of the bottom line is, even if your process map is not fancy, But you can use these pieces to start to pull together the larger vision on what you want to do to innovate. So that was one way of doing it. So process mapping is one. The other, which I think is very creative. So you go from the button down, where I should be wearing a tie here, from the button down to something that is fanciful, is creative, is thoughtful, and it's sort of a new way of doing it. I'm not saying it's a be all to end all, but I'm saying it's a really cool way of thinking about how you can become innovative at your firm. It goes back to, and there's lots of schools of thought here, but I like to sort of cast the light on what Stanford did, because when I met one of the individuals at the D school, they call it D school, one of the schools in their grad schools, D school, of course, the business school, the law school, engineering school. And what's so cool about this, from my vision, is that they were all separate schools in separate parts of the campus, maybe in totally different campuses, separate buildings, separate professors, silos, right? So those were silos. And someone had this crazy brainstorming, and they were like, what if we pulled all these schools together and started saying, you know what, let's have them do some projects together, where the design school and the engineering school and the business school and the law school all had to work on a project or come up with an idea and work on the project. And they all have their expertise, but they're sharing these ideas, they're collaborating, they're innovating. And so from that, they started coming up with these cool ideas and concepts. And dare say, Stanford's launched quite a few legal tech startups. So it's been very productive. But one way that they're able to think about some of this stuff is through design thinking. If you have never gone through one of these things before, it's not life transforming, but it is something that is a new way of looking at how you would practice. So there are 5 pieces to design thinking. The first part is, and I'll do this quickly and then I'll go in depth in just a second. You want to empathize. So empathize with the problem that's there. Then you're like, all right, once I've understood the problem, you need to define it. Literally say, okay, what is the problem? Maybe you write it down. Then you start to come up with ideas. So you get creative, start to think about ideas. Then you build out solutions. And then finally you test it. Now, so think about this, and I've done it, I don't know how many times at this point in time. Think about the law firm, and you go to a lab environment. At that lab environment, you have coders, so people who know how to code things. You have designers who have the visual eye, right? You might have database people. You have the stakeholders who know what's supposed to happen in a perfect world. You get everyone to sit around a table, and you start going through this process. It's very creative. It's very outward looking, and it tends to be very positive. So how does this really work? Well, as I described, you're doing like an empathizing of like the problem. So you're conducting interviews, you're uncovering the emotions, and literally you are uncovering the emotions of some people who are like, this is the worst process ever. I don't know why we're manually entering all of the attorney work that they've produced over X period of time for this matter, for that matter. Is there a better way? So you're listening to those individuals and you're trying to see, oh my goodness, they're going through a lot of pain. Is there something else that we can do? I apologize for some of the graphics here. You're defining that. So what is the problem? What's the human-centric problem statements? And you're identifying that sort of component to it. You're inferring insights. And a lot of this stuff is whiteboarding. So you're going up to a whiteboard, you get these little stickums and you're putting the stickums up and you're getting to a point where you can ideate. And this means everyone, 201, is getting around and ideating. They're thinking about like, what creative idea, completely off the wall ideas can we come up with that makes sense? Then you prototype. So you actually have people who may have never prototyped anything in their lives coming up with an idea and building out that workflow themselves. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just pencil to paper, making stick figures, but you're prototyping that out and then eventually you're testing it. So it's kind of cool. So you're actually testing it. And then eventually you're going back to the drawing board and you're saying, okay, does this work? Doesn't it? And you keep doing that. And it's an iterative process for the phases for all of this. This is what it might look like. A lot of people talking, no idea is a bad idea, all that fun stuff. And you get it. So you're empathizing, you're defining, you're iterating, you're prototyping, and then you're eventually testing. So What are some quick examples? Well, we talked about it. One of the first legal bots that was out there was to help people get out of parking tickets. It's since gone to other spaces, but really neat. Someone had built this thing, so use a Q&A. Where'd you get it? What time What time was it? Upload that particular ticket. Yeah, you get the idea. VisaBot, helping people from around the world get a visa. And it's kind of a cool thing. So again, jurisdictionally based. Where do you live? What are the requirements? What do you have access to? All of that stuff. So built in a bot. No human intervention. Pretty easy. Kind of neat. Um, Other bots around building privacy policies or non-disclosure agreements. Other innovative areas that we're going to start to see. Um, a legal app store. So the legal app store that we would eventually see is going to look somewhat similar to what you see with your app store for your iPhone or your Android device. It's a place you can go to. You can download your applications. You can plug and play. Your firm knows which you should have access to. Those apps can share information when it makes sense, when you allow it to do so. That's going to be some crazy innovation that we're going to start to see in the not too distant future. So single platform, interoperable, secure. It knows who you are, knows what you're doing. Sounds spooky, or creepy. It has all the resources available to you. So all of these pieces start to come together. It's kind of a neat resource to be able to have. This is innovation that we're about to see if you haven't seen already. Um, there's other innovations out there, and I love to talk about blockchain, probably to my own detriment or fault. And this one's cool, though. We're talking about innovation in the blockchain space for online dispute resolution so that you enter into an agreement. That agreement, that legally binding agreement, is stored on the blockchain. It knows both parties, has the agreement, has the parameters around that, so that you can get to the point where, God forbid, something goes wrong. You've entered into that agreement on your mobile device, on your computer, whatever the case is, virtual shaking of the hands. It's stored on the blockchain. Unfortunately, something goes awry. So you then enter into that online dispute resolution where it knows the smart contract. So it knows the language, it knows the arbitrators from around the world who may not be legal professionals, believe it or not, are making decisions based on the evidence at hand. Mostly there's going to be simplistic in the beginning, but we'll see where it goes. And it gets to the point where those people are aggregating their decisions and hopefully making the right decision. That's sort of innovation that we're starting to see stuff in. Now, I know that we only have a few minutes left. So get ready for what I consider to be the speed round of innovation that's coming. One of the biggest themes that I've had when I talk about technology in the legal space is that there are going to be times for all of us, especially if you play in the practice for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, where there's going to be some crazy disruption. There's going to be disruption to the way that you practice potentially and how that goes about, in my personal opinion. But there's also going to be immense opportunity. And what I'm about to outline are those opportunities that are about to take place. Some of the, in the beginning, you're going to be like, yeah, Joe, I get it. Some of the other stuff you may be like, nah, Joe, I don't believe that at all. So here we go. So drone delivery is coming. It's only based on regulations that we're not having it right now. What implications will that have on your practice? Driverless cars, crazy litigation that will probably come from this with the code. God forbid that people are going to be hurt. Yes, so that's predicted to come. These are my predictions. 3D printing. Yes, that's going to happen on the printing side, but we're also talking about the food. So if you have a doctor that says you're deficient in vitamin D, what does that look like? What do you need to take? Well, what potentially could be the result of that? AI generated coding, that is coming. If you haven't heard of GPT-3, it's going to be 4 pretty soon. We're talking about an Elon Musk organization that is the biggest algorithms, the most sophisticated algorithms against the biggest amount of data that we've ever seen, and what it can do. It's summarizing documents, a billion pages of documents, able to summarize that very quickly, very easily, coherently. DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. These are blockchain-based companies that are a little bit of code, some license agreements, some legalese that are baked into the code that do things automatically. These will definitely show up on the docket within the next 5 years. So we'll see that. The legal impact. So innovation, all of this is innovation, but the legal impact are huge regulations, contracts, litigation, and transactional opportunities. The next one, smart toilets. All right, yeah, that's something that's coming. You can imagine what we'll talk about in a second on that. So robot swarms, these are things that you will see on the innovation side. How will that filter into the legal industry? Smart dust. That's the ability. These are tiny little chips that are GPS chips that can be smeared on a car, can be smeared on an individual. We're talking about privacy concerns. We're talking about HIPAA concerns. We're talking about litigation and transactional opportunities. All of this, using innovation, we now have to think about how that component will filter into the shape-shifting matter, projected to be in 2032. Public mood monitoring, yes, that's coming. We're already seeing that within algorithms. As we've gone virtual, there are companies now that are using first run interviews with attorneys or lawyers, prospective attorneys to a firm that are looking at their facial expressions. Are they lying or are they not? Are they bolstering their resume by saying something, whatever it is? And you can now analyze that sort of thing. Things that we all need to think about. These are innovative thoughts, but yes. Implantables. If you are having a child or have a child now, more than likely within the next 15 years, they will have an implantable of some sort. What are the regulation concerns? What are the security concerns, the privacy concerns? All of that, right? The last one I will share as we almost finish up here. Data storage is changing. It's almost ubiquitous at this point in time, but you have the ability to store data on organic materials like a tree. Why would you ever want to do that? I don't know, but you can actually now store information to the cellular level of a tree. So then we move forward. As innovation gets up there in the legal side, so we have AI board members and politicians projected to be in 2045, dream reading and recording projected in 2040, artificial consciousness. Yes, the stuff of sci-fi more than likely will happen in the next 40 years. And then lastly, very trippy in some respects, human cloning. Some groups around the world are already trying this. Ethically, it is completely forbidden and thought of as a major no-no, but there are groups working on that. And what are the legal implications, impacts? Huge regulations, security, privacy, litigation opportunities as well. All of this is at hand. So I'm going to conclude here and say, what we're talking about with innovation isn't just something that is going to impact the legal industry on an incremental way. It's going to continue to grow in many different respects. I say lean into the conversation, do whatever you can to look at what's happening within different parts of technology, embrace what you can do internally, leverage some of those tools with design thinking or process improvement. Those are the things that we have that are available to us. I am always here to talk about this stuff ad nauseum. Sorry for you all. So here, happy to talk about it. Thank you, Austin. Happy that you were all able to join today. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care, everyone.